Hey YouTube, so going to be changing the front end suspension on a 2007 Chrysler 300. So I got all the parts from 1aauto.com, about $450. So got new struts, new rear shocks. I got the inner and outer tie rods that I'm going to be putting in, and then upper control arms, lower control arms on each side, sway bar links, lower ball joints, and then the tubes that go over the inner tie rods. So get started. So for this job, just gonna need some basic hand tools and a couple special tools. So you're gonna need a pickle fork to take off the tie rods. A breaker bar is gonna help loosen all the nuts. I have a flathead screwdriver, a large socket ratchet, 18mm wrench, and then 7/8 socket, 18mm socket, 13 and 10. And then a medium-sized ratchet here for the 13 and the 10. And then a pair of needle nose pliers to take off some clips, jaw puller for the lower control arm and upper control arm, vice grips to hold the nuts and the bolts, and then a pipe wrench for the inner tie rod, get that loose. So let's get started. I want to put the parking brake on first before we jack up the car. Gonna jack it up from the front of the car on the center beam. So got it lined up here, and there we go. Now I'm gonna wanna make sure these bolts are loose before I get this up in the air. Okay, so got the car jacked up now and off the tires. So gonna wanna put some jack stands underneath it for extra support. Okay, got the tire off. So here's all the parts we're gonna be replacing. Got the upper control arm, the strut, and then down here we got the sway bar link, lower control arm, and tie rod. I'm going to use some of this liquid wrench. I'm just going to hit all these bolts. That way it's a lot easier when I try to take all these off. So I'm just getting it right in here. So first thing I'm going to get off is this sway bar link. As you can see, I'm using vice grips to hold it as I get the bolt unscrewed so it doesn't spin. Then I'm using vice grips to hold the nut while I use this 10mm to unscrew it. And there we go. So get that off, and now this can come out, and now we can get the strut out. For the strut, there's an 18mm bolt down there that we got to get first. Now that I got the bolt off, I'm gonna disconnect the control arm. So just an 18mm just to work this guy off. And there we go. Okay, so to separate the control arm using this jaw puller, this guy just fits on right here, and then you just got to screw this in with a ratchet. Now that we got that popped off, just gonna put the bolt back in just to hold this in place. Now we got these 18mm bolts on the side of the control arm. There's one over here on the right, and then there's one right down here that's a little harder to get to. So I'm gonna take off just this wire harness right here, using a 10mm just to get more space. So this can just go off to the side, and then on the left side here, same deal, just gonna move some of that stuff. And so I got my 18mm ratchet, just working it through this little small opening right here. And it's just enough space to work it off. Now I'm gonna use a 13mm to take off these bolts to the strut. Once you get those top bolts off and the bottom bolt off, you can just take the strut straight out. Now that the strut's out, it gives you room to get these bolts out and take out the old control arm. So there's the old guy. And then now we're gonna be putting in the new one. So I'm gonna move this down just to make room to put the new strut in. And then this guy can just slide right up in here, and we're gonna connect the top part first. So I just gotta line it up in the holes, and then reach up above and screw in the 13mm nuts on top. And there we go. So got the control arm in and the strut. So just need to tighten these guys up and then just put those 18mm nuts back on. Now that I got the new control arm and strut in, just gonna reconnect this guy right here and screw this down. And then now we need to line up the strut with that lower control arm. So just working around it. And then once you got a bolt through the middle, just got to tighten this down. Using vice grips again to hold down the nut. And then I'm able to turn this with an 18mm and tighten it all the way. Now I'm going to tighten down these 18mm bolts. We don't want to tighten these all the way down yet though. Want to make sure we have the wheels on the ground before we do that. And there we go. So I got the upper part done. Now we're going to need to move on and take out the lower control arm right here and the tie rods, inner and outer. So I'm going to start with the lower control arm. To get to the lower control arm and tie rod, just going to take the brake and rudder off. Now that we have those off, just need to move this little metal bracket piece out of the way, and then we'll be able to get underneath it to the lower control arm and this tie rod. So just 10mm bolts, there's 3 of them. Okay, now I got more clearance so I can use a pickle fork and get these guys popped off. Using a 7/8 socket and a breaker bar just to get this loose. And then this just comes right off. So I'm gonna undo the bolt to the lower control arm as well. So 7/8 socket or 22mm should work. So for the tie rod, just gonna be banging in this pickle fork. And then the jaw puller I'm gonna use for the lower control arm. So I just need to tighten this guy up. And there we go. So I got the tie rod popped off and then got that lower control arm popped out as well. So I'm going to use vice grips to hold the nut so it doesn't spin. And then just got to take out this little black clip. This just pops out. Now I can just move this little plastic part out of the way. That way I can get to that bolt with a ratchet or a breaker bar. So using an 18mm and a breaker bar just to loosen this up. Now I just need to undo this completely. Okay, now the bolt just pops right out, and now the control arm comes out. And as you can see, pretty cracked up. Definitely need to be replaced, so good thing we're doing this. Then the new control arm just fits right back in. Slide the bolt back into it. And then just tighten down the nut on this side. And then next we just want to put this back in right here. Next step is to take off this tie rod. So if the tie rod end is pretty stuck on here, I'm going to use a pipe wrench and vice grips. So now that nut is freed up. So now I'm going to use vice grips again, put it right here, and then pipe wrench just to break this loose. Okay, so taking this off, going to count how many turns I spin it. And so 23. So 23 turns altogether. Next, I'm going to use these needle nose pliers just to take off these clips. And then there's a clip back here. Should be able to just pop this off. Now I just need to pull off the rubber boot. And then I'm going to be using this pipe wrench again to loosen this. Once the inner tie rod is loose, you can just spin it off. And then this little white rubber piece we're going to want to put back on the new one. Now I'm just going to spin on the new inner tie rod and just get this nice and tight. And then I'm going to use the pipe wrench again just to really tighten this down. Now just need to slide the new rubber boot up and over, and just clip that back in. Just using a plastic tie just to tie this down and keep it on. And then going to use the old clip to go on the bottom part. Now just going to spin this nut back on. And then here's the new tie rod end, so just going to count the turns. So 23 turns, and now just tightening this up with just a pair of vice grips. And then this is just going to go right back in here. Now I got the new parts in, so just need to put all the bolts back on and tighten all this down really good. Now that everything's tightened down, just going to put this little metal plate back on, and then also going to put on the brake and rotor. I'm going to put one of the lug nuts back on just to hold this in place for the brake, that way it fits on. Now that the wheel's back on, just going to lower it down. Okay, now I can tighten down the upper and lower control arms. So now that the weight's on the wheel, definitely want to tighten down these bolts on either side of this control arm, so 18 millimeter. I'm also going to tighten down the lower control arm now that it's in place. And then final step, just put the little black piece in to hold this plastic part together. So for the passenger side, same steps, but as you can see, all done. Got both sides all switched out, so suspension on this guy is going to be much better. Only difference on the driver's side is you have to move the coolant reservoir for the control arm bolts. So here's the new control arm and strut. Looks so much better. And then here's the driver's side, also done. So drove the car around the block, and it feels tighter than ever. Definitely feels like a brand new car again. So really good to get this changed out, and hopefully this video helps show kind of the steps that I took to change out the front suspension. So I'll keep uploading more. Thanks for watching, guys. Appreciate it.